So we'll move on to part 2, and for some of you it is part 1, and that's okay. And here we're going to talk more about the policy and guidelines surrounding mobile accessibility. If you are just getting to this session, I am Kianda, and I am an accessibility consultant, and I sit on the board of WCAG, W3C, and I'm in the working groups that include the ARIA working group, which is the ARIA, as well as the Silver Team Task Force. We've been charged with updating WCAG or UAAG from 2.1 to 2. From 2.0 to 2.1. If you have a question, you can always feel free. Okay, so to type it in the chat, and I will keep my eye on the chat, and I will address your questions as I go through. If I miss any, I'm sure my peers will let me know, and I'll make sure that I address your questions. I'm just been made aware that some of you were not in part 1, which is perfectly fine. So I will try not to refer to things we spoke about in part 1 if you were not in that session. Don't feel like you missed anything. We were simply discussing WCAG standards and guidelines, the UAAG standards and guidelines overall. In this session, we are going to focus on mobile accessibility specifically. So what's important here are user agents. UAAG. User agents, okay, they include anything from your browsers to your browser extensions, media players, readers, anything that renders web content is considered a user agent. Now, some accessibility needs are better met in the browser than in web content, such as text customization, your preferences, and some user interface accessibility features. A user agent follows UAAG 2.0. You can see the standards for this. You can visit section 508.gov to get more details on UAAG, or you could just simply do a Google search on UAAG. So these are the guidelines that user agents follow to improve the accessibility through its own user interface and its ability to communicate with other technologies, including assistive technology, which is software that some people who are differently able may need to meet their necessary requirements. Now, all users, not just users who are differently able, will benefit from user agents that follow UAAG 2.0. So it's imperative and almost critical that you, if you're in charge of or tasked with the duties of accessibility, that you are aware of these guidelines. Now, UAAG is part of a series of accessibility guidelines, including UAAG and the authoring tool Accessibility Guidelines, ATAG, which I'm going to go over in a different session. However, UAAG is primarily for developers of web browsers, browser extensions, like I mentioned, the media players, and anything that gives you content on the web. Its technical documents are developed by W3C, WCAG's User Agent Accessibility Guideline Working Group. It is initialed UAWG. You can Google that working group as well. They are part of the W3C Worldwide Web Consortium and the WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative. So UAAG and its supporting resources are intended to meet the needs of several different or various or the most ubiquitous group of individuals possible. including policymakers, your managers, and whoever needs access to this. So people who want to choose user agents that are more accessible, they can use UAAG to evaluate. There's an evaluation form for user agents, and you can find that evaluation form by going to the UAAG website. And that's how you can look at the different browsers. You can look at the different MP or MP4s, MP3s. You can look at the different user agents and evaluate which are more accessible for whatever you're trying to accomplish. Now, those who want to encourage their existing user agent developers to improve accessibility in future versions, you can also file any bugs against UAAG, or you can refer your vendor of the user agent vendor. You can refer them to UAAG itself and let them know that they need to be compliant or that they are lacking some of the accessibility features that are required. UAAG was developed to help those future generations of web browsers become more accessible, of course, to provide alternative information based on user technology and platform, and also to align with UAAG 2.0, WCAG 2.0, and ATAG 2.0, which is for course authoring tools 2.0. UAAG is complete. Remember, if you were in the earlier session, I was telling you that we were still working on it. It's in recommendation phase, and you can use it because it's done because of the phase it's in. Here, UAAG is done. There's no working on it. This is what it is. It provides specific guidances for browsers and other user agencies and reference information for anyone who's interested in accessibility. So although many of the UAAG 2.0 features are supported in individual browsers, there is a need for a more consistent and reliable support for accessibility features across all browsers and user agents. 2.0 provides specific accessibility guidance for user agent developers who want to just build a better experience for their users. And its guidelines are, even because it's complete, W3C does not plan to advance UAAG 2.0 to recommendation status because it's done. We are planning to include user agent accessibility considerations in future accessibility guideline work, but it won't be for UAAG. It could be for UAAG or ATAG. I know that's a lot of words, but so UAAG covers web browsers to benefit those who are who identify as differently able, and those who use the web on their mobile devices. UAAG, WCAG, also covers web pages and web applications, including content used on mobile devices. And ATAG, the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guideline, covers software used to create web pages and applications, including mobile. So tomorrow I will go into a little bit more detail about ATAG. I know we may have discussed earlier that WCAG 2.1 covers a wide range of recommendations for making web content more accessible. Following these guidelines will make your content more accessible to the widest range of individuals possible. including accommodations for those who identify as being blind or with low vision, or deafness, hearing loss, dexterity limitations, speech considerations, photosensitivity, any combination of these cognitive, and which includes your learning disabilities and any other cognitive limitations. But it will not address every user need for people who identify with these types of disabilities. Now, these guidelines address accessibility of web content on desktops, laptops, tablets, mobile devices. So following these guidelines will also often make web content more usable to users in general, but it will never fully cover every person. With CAG 2.1, the success criteria was written as testable statements that are not technology specific. The guidances about satisfying the success criteria in specific technologies, as well as general information about interpreting the success criteria, is provided on WCAG's website, with some links about how you can apply the recommendations to your technology specific inquiries. So WCAG extends to its recommendations from 2008. They went into 2.1 recently, and I'm not even sure if the federal government has fully adopted 2.1, but 2.1 started in 2008. We started working on it, so it's been a while. So content that conforms to 2.1 also conforms to 2.0, obviously. So but it's not the other way around. So if you are measuring conformance or pass-fail of accessibility, if you are following WCAG 2.1, don't worry about it. 2.0 is covered. However, if you're following 2.0, 2.1 may not be covered. Some of the items in 2.1 may not be covered. So be mindful of that and be aware that the versions have changed. So the working group that I'm currently a part of, we are looking at policies that require conformances to 2.1, but we also are looking for an alternate means of conformance. The publication of WCAG 2.1 will not deprecate or supersede 2.0, while 2.0 will remain a W3C recommendation. We advise the use of WCAG 2.1 to maximize any future accessibility and application of accessibility efforts. The W3C also encourages use of the most current version of WCAG when you're developing or updating your web accessibility policies. So the sooner that you can adopt 2.1 success criteria in your workflow, the better. If you're following 2.0, most likely you're missing a few things. So 6 of the new success criteria, 6 of the WCAG 2.1, and we went over those a little earlier, will benefit those with motor and dexterity disabilities, but more so, they also will benefit those who are using mobile devices. For most of us, it's just very annoying, right? When we have to rotate our phone or tablet and the content doesn't adjust. For some people, it actually prevents them from being able to use the app. Consider someone who has a device mounted on his or her wheelchair, such as this individual who's using a head wand in this image here. They are using a head mouse to interact with it. Applications should just adjust to the orientation of the device if possible. It would be extremely difficult for this user to rotate their device to meet the needs of your site that was designed. So content should not restrict its view and operation to a single display orientation, such as portrait or landscape, unless it's essential to the content itself. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Content orientation. We spoke about it if you were in the first session in brevity, but we'll go into it a little bit more here. Examples where a particular display orientation may be essential are a bank check, because that's always going to be in landscape, slides for a projector, TV. I mean, what content just should never be restricted so that it will always match the device orientation. If the user has locked the device's display to a specific orientation, the application should just pick that setting up and display their content accordingly. That's where we are falling into an issue. So here's an example of UAAG. Let's say a user typically views their web content on their mobile phone at a high level of zoom. This content can frequently position its elements outside of the viewport, which will require scrolling. And if she rotated the device, then she would be able to see all of the content. However, when trying to navigate the content in the locked position, she has to scroll horizontally or vertically to see the viewport. So that's where we have a design issue. Now here once again is an example of an exception. Anytime a particular display orientation is applicable to the functionality of the content. So responsive design and development of the application still needs to meet success criterion for reflow, which is 1.4.10, for text spacing 1.4.12, and that's because web content that can arbitrarily wrap over multiple lines, it can be an issue when they're trying to appropriately display. So the primary exceptions to reflow content are also graphics and video. So if you get a chance, please look into that success criterion of your orientation, and know that, think about your users and think about how they may access it. Particularly what we are looking for is, if the user locked their orientation, will your program, software, website recognize that? So ensuring that the device is not locked to a specific orientation is how you can ensure compliance. Making sure that if they rotate the device from one orientation to another, that there are no layout specifications for different orientations. And also consider responsive design. Think about your responsiveness. Use a CSS to set the orientation that allow for both landscape and portrait. You can also implement some show hide controls that can be used to allow access to content in different orientations. Pointer gestures. All functionality that uses multi-point or path-based gestures for operation can be operated with a single pointer without a path-based gesture, unless there's a multi-point or a path-based gesture that's essential to the actions performed. Unless you're trying to get into some complex gestures like pinching and zooming and swiping, they also must be performed using simple gestures like a single tap, double tap, or that long press that we talked about earlier. So if you can pinch and zoom, we also want users to be able to double tap and get the same response. Also, you should note that this requirement applies to web content that interprets pointer actions. For example, this does not apply to actions that are required to operate the user agent or the assistive technology, okay? A single pointer gesture. It uses only one touch point and no movement. The touch point could be a finger or a pointing device. The user would tap with a finger or click with its device. This must be tested on a mobile device. When touch gestures are offered that are different from mouse pointer gestures, okay, such as pinching and zooming. If functionality can be operated by pointer input, but not with single point activation alone, such as using a device dependent handle like a head wand, then it will fail that success criteria. We do consider that a failure. So this criteria does not require all functionality to be available through pointing devices, but it must be available to users who use the pointing device but cannot perform complex gestures, such as someone who can't pinch and zoom. They must be able to use their pointing device to get the same result. While content authors may provide keyboard commands or other non-pointer mechanisms that perform actions that are equivalent to complex gestures, you can look at success criterion 2.1.1 if you're in the UAAG site or for keyboard. This is not sufficient to conform to this criterion. That is because some users rely entirely on pointing devices. So if you say, well, it's keyboard accessible, so I'm good to go, that is not true. There are some people who can't use a keyboard. They only use their head wand or their blow. Their sip and puff is what it's called. It's a sip and puff mouse. They are using these to find for simple pointer inputs. For example, a user with a head wand would find clicking a control to be much more convenient than activating an on-screen keyboard command to emulate some type of a shortcut. And a person who has difficulty memorizing a series of keys or gestures, they're going to find it much easier to just click on a label control. So therefore, if one or more pointer-based mechanisms are supported, then then the benefits should be afforded to users through simple single pointer actions alone. They should be able to just do that, if nothing else. So this is path-based gestures, and we did a little bit of this morning. These are gestures such as your pinching and zooming that need 2 fingers or some type of a complicated movement, like some phone locks have the unlock where you have to follow a path to unlock the phone. These are hard to operate for people with hand tremors or limited dexterity. So users with alternative input devices such as a mouse stick, the sip and puff, or the head wand, they can also benefit. Simple gestures are easier for someone with cognitive impairments to remember and use as well. So if the site or application does not use multi-point gestures, make certain to also provide simple interfaces for those individuals. So 251 are your exceptions. Any functionality that must be based on complex paths in order for the interaction to be meaningful. For example, entering someone's signature is inherently path-based. If you are saying sign here on this Panda doc and it's actually requiring you to sign with your finger, or say FedEx, I think FedEx or UPS, when they drop off things and they're saying sign here, these are an issue because we will take exception to that. And also for the free form drag and drop options, meaning if you use a drag and drop, but it can be, you can control where it goes. For example, some drag and drop interactions, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow, they snap back when it's wrong, or it only follows a certain path, is not an exception. If they can take that item and drag it wherever they want, then that is an exception. To be compliant, if the site or your application or program does use any type of multi-touch gestures, just make sure that you also provide a simple interface. Okay, I see your question. Users who cannot accurately perform complex pointer gestures, they will have alternative means also for operating content. So the availability of user interface elements provided as a fallback for complex gestures, this helps users who may often be unaware of the support for complex gestures. This can be beneficial, especially for users with cognitive or learning disabilities. Eric asked a question. I have one question about someone who is not using or able to use their hands. Is there something that someone can talk to? I'm trying to think what it's called, speech to text? Absolutely. If they're trying to type words, speech to text is the most common one, that technology that we are supporting right now. Any other technology such as that is using voice only, that can do any other functions outside of text, is not supported or recognized by WCAG. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because it does. It's not supported by WCAG because it's rare that users will have access to this technology. And this is technology that, I'm not talking about dragging or anything like that. This is technology that their voice can open and close windows. It can select options or focus points on screens. We at WCAG are not recognizing that in 2.1. Not to say it won't show up in 2.2. So yes, Eric, speech to text will support text. It does not support navigation or identifying focus. Okay, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that clarified it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So, pointer cancellation 252. This helps people with tremors, mobility, dexterity impairments, who may touch or click on the wrong location by mistake. And this mistake could actually cause an unintended action. This success criteria also benefits people with cognitive disabilities. They can get confused when something unexpected happens because they've activated a control by accident. So the intent of this success criteria is to make it easier for users to prevent accidental or erroneous pointer inputs. People who are differently abled in various ways, they can inadvertently initiate touch or mouse events with unwanted results. The most accessible way to incorporate pointer cancellation is to make activation occur on the up event. Touch screen mouse click equivalent on focus. So the down event of the pointer is not used, should not be used to execute any part of the function. Okay, so the up event reverses any outcome of the preceding down event. Completing the function on the down event is what's important. Here are some exceptions. Applications where the action happens on the down event in order to seem natural. Keyboard and numeric keypad functionality. Actions required by the operating system where the user agent or assistive technology for it to function appropriately. So if you want to be compliant with 252, these are some of the things that you can ensure happen. You want to design actions to happen only on the up event. The down event of the pointer is not used to execute any part of the function. Developers should use the built-in generic on-click events that happen on the up event by default. Only use the down event when the behavior is essential. And that's developer talk. Here's something we all do quite often. Motion actuation. So we went on and included this in version 2.0 as it is important for mobile. In 2008, it wasn't so much, but now it is. So functionality that can be operated by device motion, meaning like moving your device, or by the user motion, such as a hand swipe. We want to make sure that it can also be operated by user interface components and responds to the motion. Response to the motions, they can be disabled to prevent any accidental actuations, except when the motion is used to operate functionality through an accessibility supported interface, or the motion is essential for the function and doing so would invalidate the activity. So be aware of the motion. Let's talk about that a little bit more. This success criteria helps people who are or may be unable to perform specific, my dog is so disrespectful. Okay, what was I saying? Specific actions or motions like tilting, shaking, gesturing, because the device might be mounted or users may be physically unable to do it. So this success criteria just wants to ensure that users can still operate the functionality by other means, such as touch, or even if you have the ability to incorporate voice. Now, shaking the input or the mobile device to undo the last action, tilting the device to advance forward, these are things that you want to have another alternative for. Even gesturing towards the user-facing camera to move forward or backward, these are things we want to have alternatives for. Movement is important in a lot of games or applications that simulate musical instruments. And shaking the phone to play the maracas requires movement of the device. In all cases, the user must be able to turn off the motion to complete the action. And the author should also provide another way to perform the action that does not require the user to move the device. Here are a few examples on this slide. This motion actuation only concerns intentional movements or gestures. It does not include geolocation, beacons, activity measurement. It does not include motions needed to operate your AT. So, ensuring compliance. Some users have their devices locked in a fixed position and they just can't move it for several reasons we talked about earlier. We also talked about those with tremors. It may cause an action by moving the device by mistake. A common example is shaking the device to undo deleting an item from a list. A compliant application would provide a mechanism to turn off the shake to undo features. It must also provide another way to recover the deleted item. That may be to add a button to undo the action, or the application may provide a way to find the deleted item and restore it maybe. a reader or a book reading application that uses the camera and eye tracking is another example. The application detects when users have completed reading a page and advances to the next page. This application must also have another means to advance the page and a way to turn off the eye tracking, even though it is an accessibility feature. .255 target size. The goal of this success criteria is to make the controls large enough to see and touch. This helps people with the who identify with tremors or impaired mobility to activate any controls. Components with small touch targets can be difficult to interact with for these individuals. The size of the target for pointer input must, which we talked about in the last section, must be 44 by 44, except if it's equivalent, meaning the target is available through an equivalent link or control on the same page, that's 44 by 44 in the CSS pixels, or if it's inline, meaning the target is in a sentence or a block of text. It has a user control agent where the size of the target is determined by the user agent and not modified by the author. Or if it's essential, meaning a particular presentation of the target and in that form is essential to the information being conveyed or transmitted. A size of 44 by 44 CSS pixels corresponds to about 9 square millimeters on a typical mobile device. So the size, this is large enough for most people to see and touch using a finger or alternative pointing device. The size is similar to the Apple iOS and Android, of course, user interface guidelines for size control. So here are some guidelines that I pulled from Apple, Nokia, which we don't even have. I haven't seen Nokia in forever, but there are some developer guidelines for Nokia and Microsoft Windows Phone. It's for about 44 by 44. You should be safe. Oh, skipped it. Here's an example of the comparison when a comparison of 44 by 44 corresponding to a 9mm square on a typical mobile device. So you can see to the left here is 44 by 44. Okay, and this is not. If you had really large fingers, or if you had tremors, or if you were using the head wand, you would find difficulty in selecting. You would have to really concentrate and focus on selecting the right one. There also are exceptions. Interfaces can still have controls smaller than 44 by 44, but in that case, you must provide another control to perform the same operation. That is 44 by 44. So you might as well just do it the right way the first time. Links are also controls. It does not make sense to have linked text within a sentence larger than the surrounding text. So controls within a sentence or a paragraph are not what we are talking about here. They're not included in this guideline. Also think about footnotes or help links at the end of a sentence. These are also exempt from this recommendation. The next page, I think I'm going to show you on this next page. I'm not sure if I am or not, but it was a screen reader or ebook that had very small text. Let's first look at how you can, we're going to finish with insurance compliance. So just make sure that you're 44 by 44. Ensure that there's no overlap. Use standard interface controls. And if it must be smaller, ensure that you have an alternative. Okay, yeah, I did. You could test your content with various input mechanisms like speech, the mouse pointer, touch, and keyboard. Just make sure that the user can switch between the different input types and what that looks like. Did I skip one? Yeah, I did. Concurrent input mechanisms. Just making sure that the user can switch between input devices. This is success criterion 256. Now, interestingly, I want you to see this because it is a nice to have. It is not a level AA. It's level AAA. It's not required, federally mandated. But it's nice to make sure that users can switch between how they enter information. You can't assume that someone on a mobile device will only be using touch. They might also be using speech, or they may attach a keyboard to it. Web content does not restrict the use of input should not restrict input available on a platform, except where the restriction is essential, of course, and required to ensure the security of the content, or required to respect or abide by the user's predetermined settings. Now, you can test your content with various inputs. Developers only use high-level and input-agnostic JavaScript event handlers such as focus, blur, click, very high level. Register, and developers also can register event handlers for keyboard and pointer inputs that simultaneously in JavaScript. So there are ways to be compliant with that. So before I get to the last section, actually, let's take a 10-minute break because it's been an hour. So let's take a 10-minute break, and then I'll cover the last section, and then we'll wrap this up. So you can stay logged in to this interface and just step away for 10 minutes, and we'll return back at 1:36.
Okay, so it's a conference call.
Okay, so welcome back. Let's see here. Make sure I'm unmuted. And now I'm unmuted. Okay, so welcome back. Can everyone hear me? You can just type in the chat. You can hear me, or unmute yourself. Been over here messing with my computer. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was over here messing with some settings. Just wanted to make sure I didn't mess it up. All right, so the last little section that we'll cover is going to be on, I'm going to take you back to what we were discussing earlier. And we were discussing WCAG 2.0 to 2.1 conversion. And there was a success criterion that I did not get a chance to get to. It is a level A. So you are required or expected to adhere to this. And it's called status messages. This success criteria is to make sure that users are aware of important changes in the content, and specifically in content that is not given focus, and to do so in a way that doesn't unnecessarily interrupt their work. The intended beneficiaries are those who are blind, have low vision, they're using assistive technology, specifically with screen reader capabilities. An additional benefit is that AT for users with cognitive disabilities may achieve an alternative means of indicating or even delaying or suppressing status messages as they prefer or as they desire. Looking at these images here, the status message via focus based on the previous version of 2.1 is defined as having two main criteria that will determine whether something actually meets the definition of a status message as opposed to, say, a tooltip. The message provides, the first one I'm going to say is the message must provide information to the user on the success or results of an action, on the waiting state of an application, on the progress of a process, or on the existence of any errors that were made. The message is also not delivered via a change in context. Information can be added to pages which does not meet the definition of a status message. For example, the list of results obtained from a search are not considered a status update, and therefore they are not covered by the success criteria. However, brief text messages displayed about the completion or status of the search, such as searching in quotes, or if it says, you may get a message that says 18 results returned, or there may be a result that says no results returned. These are considered status updates, specifically if they do not take focus away. This criteria specifically addresses scenarios where there's also not, where new content is added to the page but the context doesn't change. Changes of context by nature interrupt the users by taking away the focus, and they are already surfaced by AT or assistive technology, and so have already met the goal to alert the user to the new content. Therefore, messages that involve changes of context do not need to be considered and are not within the scope of this criteria. Examples of scenarios that add new content by changing the context. If you look at the UAAG 2.0 update, and I'll give you the link later, but there are examples in there, and it's labeled changes that are not status messages. It will be extremely helpful to review some of those examples, because it can be a little confusing as to what's considered a change in context, and also it can be a bit confusing as to what's considered a status message. So here, So here's a status message via focus based on the revised version of 2.1. The benefits of this is when appropriate roles or properties are assigned to the status message, the new content is spoken by screen readers in a way that it assists the users. Most sighted users can observe text peripherally, adding to the viewpoint. Such content provides additional information without affecting the user's current point of regard. The ability of an assistive technology to announce new information or new important text allows the users to benefit from the awareness of the information in a equivalent manner. So developers assigning roles or properties to status messages provide possible future and personalization opportunities, such as the potential to be exploited by assistive technologies created for users with some cognitive disabilities, where authors elect to design additions to the screen which do not change the context or take them out of focus. The information is arguably of less importance than something presented using a dialogue which must be acknowledged by the users. And depending on the user's preference, an assistive technology may choose to delay, suppress, or even transform the messages, so a user is not unnecessarily interrupted, or conversely, the AT may highlight such messages where the user finds that it's more beneficial to go ahead and interrupt them. Let's look at the roles a little bit more. There are several types of situations or roles that include techniques for my developers here, or a combination of techniques that are known and documented to be sufficient for this type of situation. The role of status for results of an action. You have the role of alerts, or the real live assertive to identify errors. You have the role of progress bar that you can use for directional assistance. You would possibly use the role of status if you were to do, I provide an example here, a successful form submission. The role of status uses the status role from the ARIA specifications or the ARIA to notify the AT, your assistive technology, when the content has been updated with information about the user's or application status. This is done by adding this specific role equals quotation mark status, to that specific element that contains the status message. The ARIA Live region role of status has an implicit ARIA Live value of polite, which allows users to be notified via AT, such as screen readers when status messages are included or are popping up for them. The role of status also has a default ARIA atomic value of true. So that updates to the container marked with a role of status. It will result in the AT presenting the entire contents of the container to the user. So for my developers, I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but consider looking at the role of equal status when you are developing for a status update. Now, alert, you can use the role, you can say role equal alert, or you can do the ARIA Live assertive to identify areas. This is when an incorrect value is inputted on a form. It notifies the AT that an error has occurred. The ARIA Live attribute makes it possible for AT to be notified when error messages are injected into a live region container. So this content that's within the ARIA Live region, it's automatically read by AT without AT having to focus on the place where the text is displayed. So look more about if there's supposed to be a specific input on the form. There's a right or wrong answer. Consider using role equals alert or ARIA Live assertive or polite. And progress bar. Role equal progress bar for a directional assistance. It just lets users know when they are in a process. An example is basically what we see every day, such as our downloading process. The progress bar role, it describes the effect it has on a browser and the AT. It should be used for elements that display the progress status for a task that may take a long time or may consist of several steps. The progress bar role also indicates that the user request has been received and the application is making progress towards completing the requested action. So that's a very important role when you are implementing a process. Now, this is a lot of words. I'm not going to go through each one of them because these slides will be available to you. But these are just a few additional status messages examples. And it was intentionally, the criteria was intentionally worded to apply primarily when visible text is added or becomes visible on the page. The reason for this is that where new text is displayed, it's intended to be visible to all users. By providing a programmatic means of making sure that the text is there through AT, this criteria provides the same information to users who cannot see it. However, not all changes to the content is going to involve the addition of text to the screen. A few examples of the considerations for this criteria are: think about non-display text that is specific to AT users, modification of status text, removal of status text, or any non-textual status content, for example, an image. Oh, I think I gave y'all the answer by accident. Hopefully nobody was watching. All right, so I'm going to do a quick poll here. And I'm asking which two main criteria determine whether something meets the definition of a status message. All right. And I'm going to bring a poll up, and you can just answer when it appears on your screen. Okay, so this poll should appear on the bottom of your screen. There are two correct answers. I was only able to set the poll up for you to select one. So if you select one of the two, that's great. You can also type in the chat if you know the other correct answer. And we'll just take about 2 minutes.
I'm sorry. Where is the chat? Where is the poll at? Because I do not see that available.
You're unable to see the poll. I've been hearing that from some people. I think it depends on your browser, because I am getting responses from others on here, but yeah, I think it depends on your browser.
Oh, okay. I found it now. Well, I see it now. I see it now.
Okay, great.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, take about 10 more seconds. Okay, so it looks like a majority of you felt like the answer is E or C. And that is correct. The message, a status message is defined by UAAG with two main characteristics that will determine whether it falls under this criteria. So the message must provide information to the user on whether they were successful or not, whether they are waiting, or where they are in the progress of the process, or if there's any errors. And the message must also not be delivered via a change in context. So that's very good. Everyone pretty much got that right for the most part. All right. So